I was roped into this class by saying that this was something on communism because it has been my favorite subject ever since I started studying these ideologies. And then it came on to political ideologies and also forms of government. This is a little scary. Anyone who hears these phrases, the forms of government, political ideologies. Uh, as soon as you say these phrases, lots and lots of isms, words, logics, they come to mind and you are confused because democracy in itself is confusing as such. So when you encounter so many systems and so many ideologies, it becomes a little more confusing. So let me say at the outset that please, because this is not this is a very uh, purposeful and informal class of understanding what our world is all about, what our political world is all about. So we are under no compulsion to go into every little detail, every little definition, exact definition that has been logged into all of the dictionaries. And I will tell you why we take this approach. The most common forms that you encounter are democracy, communism, monarchy, theocracy, colonialism. Now, there are other forms of government which we will also discuss in very brief, but I'm saying that these terms in itself are not very important because the scholars of these ideologies, academicians of these ideologies, when they write peer-reviewed papers, when they write research papers, when they write research theses, they go into every small little detail because it's their job. When you are communicating in public, when you are trying to understand a subject, when you are studying a subject for your own understanding, you have to steer clear of the needless nuances and you have to understand the core of some basic philosophies and fundamentals of these ideologies. That is why we will not go into every small ism that has been discussed under the name of forms of government or political ideology. We'll go through them, we'll discuss them. So some of the most famous are it's not possible to give definitions and discuss all of them just in one go. But democracy, which is currently the most famous. In most of the world, there is some form of democracy playing, except a few Islamic countries and a few communist countries. I'm not saying that it is perfect democracy, but some sort of elections are held. Some form of democracy is held. Democracy is said to be rule of the people. Now, it's a very vague term. Why do I say this again and again? Because there is a word called republic. And if you, it has a very definite dictionary meaning. If you go and search in a dictionary, you will see that it has a very definite meaning. But America is a republic and Iran is also a republic. You will be hard pressed to find the similarities between these two countries and these two societies. There are absolutely no similarities between these two countries, and still both are republic. I think Libya is also a republic. So these words have been used and overused to the hilt, to the point where it has become almost meaningless to go deeper into these ideologies and what is the dictionary definition of these things. We have to discuss in practice what has happened, also in theory, but in practice what has happened. So the first is democracy, which we are most familiar with. Then there is communism. How is it different from democracy? When I was growing up, when I was very young, India was said to be the largest democracy, while China had the largest population. So I always wondered why is India the largest democracy. But when I grew up, I came to know that it is not a democracy; it has a communist government. In very short, a communist country does not hold elections because it thinks and believes that heaven on earth has arrived. A communist country, a communist society, a socialist society is heaven on earth. Literally, they call it heaven on earth. That everything that has been that can be thought about a good society or a very peaceful and pleasurable society has been arranged for in a communist country. And there is no need of any more elections because any election will just be coming down from the zenith because there is nothing bigger than communism, nothing higher than communism, no form of government, no political ideology higher than government. So it's no use holding any elections. So first of all, there are no elections. There is no personal freedom because it is thought that human beings are not capable of taking care of their own uh, interests. They are not capable of taking any sort of decision about their own lives. So the state, the party has to take decisions for them. The state has to take decisions for them. So there is no personal freedom. Of course, the practice is in different degrees. We will also discuss that. Just to give you a touch of what communism is, this is what it is. There is no freedom of expression, no freedom of thought. You have to do what the party says, what the state says, because heaven on earth has arrived and they are commanding you to do it. Then there is monarchy. It's very simple. The rule of the kings. For most of the history of our world, we have had monarchs, kings, some sort of kings. Dictatorship and democracy, not in the modern sense, but on one hand dictatorship and on other hand rule of the people can be held within monarchy too. So India always had kings until recent times, and but in ancient times we hear many descriptions of how different kinds of democracy existed at different periods of time. So it is not that under a monarchy, no democratic setup, democratic government, or democratic society can take place. It does take place. On the other hand, there were absolutely cruel and brutal dictators all over the world. We have known them over and over again. There was Aurangzeb, there was Akbar, there was all sorts of Islamic kings in India. There were the first emperor of China, who was said to be very cruel. Then the rule of the Mongols, although they initiated a lot of good things, but that was they were also very brutal dictators. And so were the Christian conquistadors, who then later made a conquest of Americas, Africa, and many other countries. So within monarchy, while a king is ruling, a lots of different kinds of societies and governments can happen. So monarchy is a very broad term. Uh, for example, we'll also discuss it later on. Right now, currently, Britain, United Kingdom, is a constitutional monarchy. So it is on paper, it's not a democracy, but for all practical purposes, it's a very well-functioning democracy, much better than India, you dare say. And France, on the other hand, has no king, but United Kingdom is still maintain their monarch ceremonial. She has to, the queen right now has to put her signature. She cannot go against the lower house of the parliament. She has to go by whatever the decisions they make, mostly. So she's just a rubber stamp. But rubber stamp they keep, they respect them. They have allotted certain resources to them. They have allotted them a place of dignity. And on paper, they do not say they are a democracy. They say that it's a constitutional monarchy. There is a constitution, we go by a constitution. So it's not like the emperor's writ is the constitution. The empress, the queen, cannot just do anything she wants. So, if for example, you or I offend her, then just she cannot just put us into jail and start out her own laws and rules. She has to go by the constitution. So they say it's constitutional monarchy. That is why once again I say that these terms are confusing. If you write on paper pure democracy, then you will get some very questionable countries under that list, from Africa, from Latin America, which have no kings. And on the other hand, if you say monarchy, if you take out the list of monarchy, then you will get countries like United Kingdom. Sweden has king. Netherlands has a lot of these. Belgium has, I guess, and a lot of Scandinavian other countries also maintain the constitutional monarchy. Otherwise, they are very functional democracy. So on paper, they are not democracy, but in function, they are very much democracy. On the other hand, on paper, there are some republics like Iran, but we all know that it's not a democratic country. There is no freedom of like we are accustomed to in a democracy. So monarchy is a broad term, democracy is a broad term. Under that, many things come. Communism is a very specific term which is used in a specific circumstance. Then there is theocracy. Theocracy is rule of religion. And in this, we have to make difference religion of the prophetic monotheistic variety, religion of the variety of Islam and Christianity. So, theocracy is rule of a religion like Christianity or Islam. Iran, for example, for all practical purposes, it doesn't call itself like that, but for all practical purposes, it's a theocracy. Because the Ayatollahs, the religious Shia leaders of Irani Persian community, they are the ones who rule the country. There are elections for the president of the country, but the elections are, it's not like you are all free for choosing the president. It is mainly organized by the party and the functionaries of the party. So the most powerful group, they choose their own leader. So it is a theocracy, rule of religion. Pakistan is also a theocracy. No matter if a cricketer rules it or a military dictator rules it, for most of its history, it has been ruled by military for a large period of its history. But the military is just an extended wing, just a secular army wing of, let's say, Islamic Jihad or any other terrorist organization. So it has been run by the most fundamentalist extremist factions within the Pakistani society. They have been very rabid Islamic fundamentalists, and even the military furthers their goal. The secular governments, like the cricketer rule Pakistan now, they also further their goals. So theocracy also has very different shapes. On paper, it might be different. Bangladesh is somewhere in between. It vacillates between complete theocracy and half-hearted theocracy. But even while they are half-hearted theocracy, they still manage to massacre their Hindu minorities. So theocracy also has a very, very broad spectrum. Then colonialism, it's a thing of the past, at least in its classical sense. It was not a form of government, but let's say an era in uh, world history in which certain countries of Europe, and before that certain countries of the Middle East, like Arabia and then Persia, then other Islamic countries, they went to Europe, Asia, and various other countries like India and ruled them. So we were ruled by Islamic colonialists, Islamic imperialists for 500 years, then by the European imperialists who were Christian in religion for the next 150 years or so. So this is called colonialism, in which you just simply go to a different country, defeat it, control it, and do whatever you want to do with them. And that is what happened to us in the medieval ages and then in the modern. Then there are some other terms like oligarchy. Now, these are the terms you use when you want to write a research paper. Since we are not writing a research paper here, so we are not very concerned with these terms. Oligarchy is a rule of a small number of people. So all countries in which democracy is not practiced very well tend to turn towards this. Right now, under big corporations like Twitter and Facebook and Google, all countries are under a threat of becoming oligarchies in which these big corporations threaten to rule the entire world, not just entire country, one country, the entire world. That is oligarchy. Aristocracy is also very simple, the rule of an elite. It's a term to denote that the cultural elite, financial and the cultural elite of the country rules the country. Then there is military rule. Right now in Burma, you have military rule. In Pakistan also, we have had the military rule for a large number of years. So military rule just they rule according to their own wishes. Sometimes they follow the constitution, sometimes they do not follow the constitution, or at least they do not follow the constitution until they uh, grab power. After that, they follow constitution. So just in the case where they are not allowed to take over the government by the constitution, they don't consider it good. Otherwise, they follow the constitution. So the Burmese junta is mainly like that. Indonesia was also ruled by that for many decades of its history, and this happens in a lot of countries where the democratic government is actually very weak, like in Pakistan. So the military has to take over again and again in order to maintain some sort of order in society. That order may be extremely brutal. That order may involve a lot of violence. But there has to be order for some sort of business to function, for some sort of civic life to function, and that is why sometimes military takes charge of the country. It's not always a good thing. Of course, it's generally bad in a lot of cases. But some militaries take power to restore order. Some militaries take power because the general has become more ambitious, and the only functioning institution in the country is military. In India, if they try to take over, there will be so much resistance, and there are so many other organizations. There is the police, there are other paramilitary organizations, there are many civic institutions which will put up a lot of fight, and it won't be very easy for army to, if not grabbing power, then holding power for a long time. So in a country where there are no other institutions, huge institutions which are very strong, military tends to take power again. That is called a military rule, which happens again and again in lots of countries. In Chile, it also happened, and in Spain, it happened, in Portugal, it happened. It has happened in lots and lots of countries over the history of the past 100 years. And let me tell you, that's why I focused much on monarchy, democracy. That until just 100 years ago, before the First World War, most of the world was ruled by kings and queens. There was greater and lesser degree of participation of people, common people in governments. But it did not mean that there was no participation at all in monarchies. This is how communists now, left liberals now pit democracy against monarchy. That monarchy is always bad. There was no will of the people. Democracy had the will of the people. That is not so. If you read Mahabharata, then there is an entire chapter which tells about the duties of a king and how he is to be responsible to his population, his subjects. And that is how China also functioned at various periods of time. It also had a theory of a state theory of government, how a king has to respond to his subjects in various circumstances. Arthashastra is all about government. So, monarchies, kings and queens have always thought about how to partner with the population. It does not mean that if it's a monarchy, there is no will of the people. You are completely at the mercy of the king. There is kangaroo rule. He can do anything that he wants. No. Kings, by their own volition, follow rules. It is just that they are sovereign. Yes, they rule by hereditary rights. Sometimes they choose their own successors. That is different. But if they do not, then their sons or daughters will become kings and queens. That is in essence what monarchy is. That does not mean there can be no democracy or any democratic structure, institution, or urge in that society. So that is why monarchy is different. On the other hand, democracy in this sense, in which you mean elections and adult franchise, in which you assign an age 16 or 18 where the people can vote, choose their own representative of the government or the president or the supreme leader himself. This is called the rule of the concept of adult franchising and elections, which is universal, which means that everyone has a right to vote. Everyone has a right to choose the government. This is only just 100 years old. There was democracy before. In India too, there were janpads, different kinds of governments. And in many of these janpads, there were no kings. There were just sharers of some leaders who shared power, generally two or three. There were no absolute kings in many of these systems. Similarly, in Greece also there was democracy in ancient times, but the size of those places was very small. They were generally those entities were called city states. City state is just something like Singapore, for example. Today, Singapore is a huge city because it's a modern city. These cities mostly had a population of 50,000, 60,000, at best 80, 90,000 or 1 lakh. Just that city and the agricultural area around it was declared a city state. There was no Greece at any point of time in history, unified Greece. There were always Athens, Sparta, Peloponnese, and lot of different cities, lot of different city states. They all had different kinds of governments, different kinds of political structures. But democracy was practiced in many of these. So the size was very small. Most often, all of the citizens of a city state could gather in one ground. So lots of middle ranging institutions were completely eliminated. So there was no representatives at many levels because for taking major decisions, we could gather all the citizens in a ground and call them to raise hands. Just like sometimes vice vote in parliament happens, in which the members of the parliaments are treated as citizens. So just imagine that stadium of 10,000 people, which calls all of its citizens and then takes decisions. So it was a very different kind of democracy, of which we cannot even imagine in these days. India's population is around 1.4 billion. The smallest villages cannot afford to take the direct democracy in which everyone contributes to the decision making process. In Greece, every citizen was allowed a vote, but you have to pay attention who was the citizen. The definition of citizen was very interesting. Women were not citizens, slaves were not citizens. Only the son of a citizen would be citizen. What does that mean? It means that practically at many given periods of time, 90% of even non-slave master males were also excluded from the citizenship of these Greek city-states. Why? Because if you're not a son of a citizen, then you cannot become a citizen. Then your son cannot become a citizen. So immigrants in that way were almost completely excluded from the government or from any decision-making process. So democracy was practiced at some level. Yes, there were some very nice ideas. In Rome also it was practiced. In Italy of those times it was also practiced, and they created some very good principles on which most of the Western societies and in turn most of the modern societies now being governed. They created some of the foundations of the law that we practice today, the secular law that we practice today. So they did some very nice experiments. We have to give credit to them. It has its own faults, various faults which are now coming to the fore, which are now being exposed. But they did make some major steps towards creating a democratic society. But that was far from what we imagined. It was absolutely impossible because there were no means of communication or transportation. How do you propose to choose a king 2000 years ago? By making everyone participate. There was absolutely no way in which everyone could participate. How would they cast their votes? How do you know what's in their mind? In those days, there was also no paper, or there was the writing materials were extremely exclusive and rare. So even if there was some system in which everyone would write on Tamrapatra, which would cost generations and generations of their cupboards, their gold reserves to just hold one election, then it will take at least 30, 40 years to gather uh, everyone's will. It was sheer impossible in those days. So they did what they could. Most of the government, there was no centralization of the kind that we are used to now. That is why the size of the government was not that big. Most of the decisions were taken at local level. What food to eat, these, all of this is taken care by dharma and not by state. Not religion. Religion just in the sense of dharma, it was taken care of by dharma and not by state. Temple, Hindu temple was the center of most of these activities. It was the center of charity. It was the center of education. It was the center of arts, fine arts, other kinds of learning. And through temple, dharma ruled society. And most of these villages, small towns and cities were self-governed. They had authorities, yes, but they did not answer or communicate with the central government, so to say, of a central king in everything. There was a concept of unification of India. Of course, there was a very great idea of Bharatvarsh and Ashwamedh Yajna and its consequent uh, philosophy shows you that. But there was absolutely no way to hold elections in the way we hold them. So we hold prejudices against ancient people and ancient society based on today's standards, which is extremely wrong. Why weren't women financially free in those times? So if you go to those times, there was absolutely no way in which not just women, individuals could be financially free. So when you, this is called as presentism, when you impose today's standards on ancient society. So in democracy too, you have to take care of these things. That this is a very radical and a new idea, which has been practiced in a very limited manner only in the last 100 years in the history of India. So it's not a new idea. It's not an old idea. It's a very new idea. Now, am I still audible? Well,
Yes, yes.
yes.
Yeah, आ रही है आवाज जी.
Now, kinds of ideologies. Uh, we've discussed forms of government. Now we'll discuss the kinds of ideologies, political ideologies, which are related to it. Communism, I'm not explaining right now because we'll go much deeper into it today and also tomorrow. So let us just stay at the communism, socialism, Marxism, Leninism. These are sister ideologies, and I would say not sisters. They are not sisters. It is just one woman who takes up various disguises and comes under various disguises. This is a very important analogy because once again we get stuck into different names. We get ensnared, we get quite intertwined in these different names, different sorts of fascinating names. They are just the same. Now, for us, for the victims of these political ideologies, to us, all of them are the same. In practice, when it will come down to you, Marxism, Communism, Socialism, Leninism, Maoism will still be the same. So that is why I've grouped them together. Then there are some other ideologies. Liberalism is also a part of left liberal ideologies. All of these are. Anarchism is extreme form of left liberal ideology in which they advocate that there should be no military, no army, no government. People will let just people do whatever they want. If there are riots on the street, they don't care. They say that it will help the redistribution of resources in which the poor will attack the rich and take away their resources, and it will create a good society, a just society. There might be violence, they agree. Yes, there might be violence, but that it will create a just society. So, anarchism is a very extreme form of communism. Communism we'll discuss later. Then there is liberalism, which is just a modern name. Until 90s, until 1990, when communism was alive in Soviet Union, people did not shy away from the word communism and socialism or Marxism. But after that, they started becoming shy of these tags and these labels. So they started calling themselves just the leftists, not communists, just the leftists. And then at the turn of around 2010, left became a little abusive word for they started shying away from it. So they started calling themselves liberal, classical liberals. So and now in the past 2 years in India, another breed of theirs has entered, which is now the word is very famous, woke activism, which is an extreme form of communist liberal ideologies, in which LGBT gender politics also plays a very great role. So we'll discuss it tomorrow. But that's also an extreme form of it. Populism is also like that. Aam Aadmi Party is populist. So just promise people free cylinders and free bijli, free pani, and just destabilize the current governments, come to rule somehow, and then do whatever you want, inflate the demand of oxygen cylinders and whatever you want to do. Just when the election times come, be populist. So that is also all of these are very sister ideologies for us, for the victims, because I say uh, pay focus on this word. We are the victims of these ideologies, and for us, all of these are the same. The end result, the end game is always the same. So instead of going into nuances, if you are a researcher, you can, but instead of going into nuances, you have to focus on what their impact is. Now, these are some different ideologies. There is fascism, Nazism. Fascism is a word which we are most familiar with. All of you must be. But actually, what we mean by fascism is actually Nazism. Fascism was the ideology which rose in Italy and given to a sort of conclusion by Mussolini. But it was not very famous. He did not become successful in exporting it to many other countries. Hitler was the one who became very successful in war and in ideology. And the ideology of Hitler was Nazism, nationalist socialism. So you have to focus, you have to pay attention that it is nationalist socialism. It is a kind of socialism. It is not very different from it. It is just different in a very few points from socialism. It believed in racism because it was a personal quirk of Hitler. He believed that Jews were evil because although he was an atheist by declaration, he also carried a lot of Christian beliefs. And in Christianity, anti-Semitism, which is the hatred of Jews, were very popular. It is embedded in the Bible itself. In their history of 2000 years, they have killed Jews indiscriminately in many pogroms again and again in their history. So Hitler also carried that forward. He blamed everything on the Jews. It was a fluke of it was nowhere encoded in their sort of constitution or their ideology. Uh, in the personality of the leader was extremely important in Nazi because he was the first important leader of that ideology, and it rose and fell with it. So it was a fluke of history. We shouldn't pay much attention towards it. Hollywood and most of Western academia has paid a lot of attention towards what nationalist socialism, what Nazism is, and they have created very good movies, documentaries, books, and a lot of other material. They have explored it to the hill. It was a fluke of history in which they killed 60 left Jews, almost half of the population of the Jews. They said because Hitler believed that they are at the root of all the evil in the world. They are most of the bankers, they are most of the prominent politicians, businessmen, and so they have to be killed. They are the root of all the problems. They have to be killed. So it was a very um, idiosyncratic sort of choice of Hitler, which became the character of the entire Nazi government. I'm sorry, let me show it once again. Yes. It what you have to remember about Nazism is that they came to power through democracy. Just like Kejriwal was also elected to Delhi through a very great mandate. They came to power, they were elected. And after that, they destroyed the same democratic process. After they were chosen, they destroyed democracy itself. They destroyed elections and all other democratic institutions. So that is what has to be remembered. They come through use democracy and then destroy democracy. So a fundamental aspect of any free enterprise, any democratic ideology or social system has to be that they cannot allow that ideology which has its goal as the destruction of the democratic society. That has always to be kept in.
Nation for us is a very different idea. We have a cultural idea of nation, whereas the West has a very different idea of nation. West में the idea of nation is hinged on language. So they have a very linguistic idea of nation. If you have a different language, then you are considered a different nationality. And that is why there are lots of nationalities war in the West. In India too, they are also trying to foment the same things. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel did not want linguistic states, even states in India. But while we have them now, it is advised not to splinter on the lines of small dialects and small regional identities like this. So this is that idea of nationalism is very European. It obviously leads to a lot of clashes because every small group wants to become independent. They have fights with the country which is currently ruling them. They say that they have a different identity, and then there is a clash. That parent country obviously does not want to let them go. And then that a lot of violence ensues, and there is a lot of bloodshed as a result. So that sort of nationalism is bad. But a feeling for your country, being patriotic, being partial to your country, to the point which it does not become inhuman, that is a natural tendency of anyone. We favor in-group and we do not favor out-group. That is a basic human tendency. To create a group and to root for it, to play with it, is a very, very basic human character. It's not just a human character, it's a basic animal character too. If you go and study various species, not just the primates, not just the chimpanzees and gorillas, even other species, they have within their own species, it's not like every member of their species works together. They even try to eliminate their rivals because rivals are considered sometimes more dangerous than the enemy. And they have an in-group in which they favor their own group and do not favor the outside group. So that's a very normal thing in society. We just have to take care of that. It does not go to the level of genocides or hatred. So that is the thing with nationalism. People try to give a bad name to nationalism by only a bad name to nationalism by connecting it to Nazism, but we can never forget that the full name of Nazism was nationalist socialism. So it was at first socialism, only the adjective was nationalist. They were socialist, but of a nationalist variety. So the basic foundation of their own ideology was also socialist. Now the time comes to go deeper into the various ideologies that we were going to discuss. We will discuss about communism mainly today, the history of how it came to power. Tomorrow we will discuss about the impact of communism on India, what has it contributed to Indian political and social scene, and its current ideologies like various liberal factions, the woke rights activism, and how it is affecting Hindu society. So that is something that we will discuss in tomorrow's lecture. Today we will discuss communism and its various sister ideologies and how they are connected to each other. So if you see this map, there are these are some of the most important communist countries in which there is Russia, China, those who have experienced direct communist governments for a long period of time. So there is Russia, Mongolia, China, Afghanistan, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, then all of Eastern Europe, which contains Eastern Germany, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, entire Yugoslavian countries from Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia Herzegovina, Macedonia, Serbia, and Montenegro, Albania, and then Bulgaria. This is in Europe. Then in Africa, countries like Ethiopia, Eritrea, which was earlier a part of Ethiopia, some part of Somalia, some part of Congo, Angola, and other countries like this, like Benin and Somalia. In Asia, there is also one another country which is still communist, North Korea. And in Americas, only one country could become truly communist for a long period of time, and that was Cuba. This was the extent of communism for most of its history, the political extent of communism. But this does not mean that this was all the influence of communism. India is still reeling under the impact of communism. Left liberals are still in our academia and our media and various public spaces. They are digging their roots deeper and deeper into Indian society. So there is one part where politics is important, where all of these communist countries became communist. Now none of these countries are communist except China, North Korea, Vietnam, and Cuba. Now Vietnam is practically capitalist. They do not follow the policies anymore, except just renaming some of their cities on the horrible names of their political leaders. Their best city, Saigon, it was such a beautiful name. They renamed it Ho Chi Minh City, one of the strangest names in the world, because of course it's a communist country. So they claimed it. Saigon was called Ho Chi Minh City. But apart from these few things, Vietnam is practically not a communist country anymore. China is a communist country in its political setup, in which there is just one party. There are no elections. The supreme leader is completely supreme. His writ runs supreme. There is some sort of constitution, but they can change it at will anytime they want. Just like Xi Jinping changed the constitution to give him more powers, and he is now president for life. So this is the character of a communist country. In society, in economics, in finance and economy, they are not at all communist anymore. They have become even more capitalister than the capitalists. They, like they say, they have given red carpet treatment to most of the capitalist urges and the corporations, and that is how they have become rich in the past 40 years or so. Uh, of course, they have some euphemisms, like they do not say they buy and sell. They say the government has given it on lease to their subjects. Now, this lease can be sold and bought. So it is practically you are buying and selling land. It is just that was my. Can you still see my screen?
No, it's not. It's not busy.
Just 1 minute.
is exclusive.
Yes. So in China they say that they buy and sell leases, but it is practically buying and selling land. So they give different names, but they are practically doing whatever the capitalist countries are doing. Cuba also in political structure it is completely a communist country, but in economy they have not like China entirely. They are not very free, but freer than before. Some countries like Venezuela are now going the communist way ever since 80s and 90s, and they have, as a result, been economically and socially ruined. But they are not officially completely communist like the communist countries by 1985 or 1989. Only one country is almost completely communist, that is North Korea, in which there is no freedom of thought or expression, no elections, of course. The supreme leader is completely supreme. Uh, you are allowed to have only a certain length of hair. So if there are 4 or 5 inches, you cannot have hair longer than that. You have to wear a certain kind of clothes. Some kinds of foods are banned, and everything is organized. Everything is even the road is organized in the sense that how people walk on the road, who will get out of the house, who will not, how many people any day will get out of the house. And it's still a country which is completely communist. It is said that they have killed 1/3 of their population by starvation by various methods. But that's practically the only communist country that is left today, which is almost a completely communist country, which is once again a complete disaster. To start by the damage done by these people, Nazism, which is said to be the greatest monster of the 20th century by almost everyone, killed 60 lakh Jews. And in direct warfare and other things, they killed many others. But directly massacring their opponents, which was Jews, it was 60 lakh people. And now just a roll call of people killed by communism. Here is a roll call. Russia, 2.5 crore. China, 6.5 crore. Latin America, 1.5 lakh. Vietnam, 10 lakh. Afghanistan, 15 lakh. Africa, 17 lakh. Cambodia, 20 lakh. Cambodia, which had a population of just around 70 or 80 lakh. So 1/4 of their population was wiped out by communism. This is the 1/4 of their population. In India, that it would mean around 35 crore or so. So this is the kind of roll call of communism. North Korea, 20 lakh. China, 6.5 crore. These are the people directly killed by, you can say, the Communist Party or the communist state. Let alone indirect victims directly killed by them by famine and by these methods, by the destruction of economy and by various other methods. You could add on even more people to this list. So this ideology killed 10 crore. Another ideology killed 60 lakh. By the sheer number of people, communism is far worse than Nazism. But still, you hear Lenin, the name of Lenin very positively, and the name of Hitler as a synonym of the devil, the very devil. Why is that so? Because the communists won the war, not just in Second World War, not just against Hitler, but in all of our universities and colleges and academia and media, they won the war and they are still the ruling party. They are no longer the ruling party in countries, most of the countries, but they still rule our culture. So they set the narrative. It doesn't matter what the truth is. It doesn't matter who the bigger killer is or who the real killer is. It matters what the communists say and what they can support, the kind of truth that they can support by propagating falsehood in universities and colleges like they are doing in India. So now let us go deeper into what actually communism is. Some of the basic tenets of communism, where everyone is in theory considered equal. Whether they want to be equal or not is a different thing. Whether everyone is considered equal. Rousseau, during the Enlightenment, gave this idea of everyone was equal. Everyone is born equal. He didn't tell how. He just claimed that how everyone is equal. And communists took that idea to extreme. And they favor achieving this equality by force, any force that they can muster. So it is not your will that you want to be equal or not. You have to be equal by force, by how the state tells you to be so. Then there is one party rule. Of course, no elections, just like I told. Communism is heaven on earth. Once a communist party is in power, they will not allow any other party to compete, no elections to be held. They will not allow any elections to be held. So remember this every time they say that there is some fault in the democracy currently. They are saying that only because they are not in power. As soon as they come in majority in power, they will smother, they will kill every sort of democratic institution and urge within that society. They are far worse than any dictator that you can imagine. Abolition of private property. So you will no longer be able to buy, let alone a house or a farmland, not even your clothes yourself in its extreme form, in it, not just extreme pure form, in how it is now being practiced in North Korea and how it was practiced in Soviet Union and Russia when it was in much in power. So you cannot have any private property. You cannot even buy your own clothes or food. So how does that work? They say that individuals, if left alone, they create inequality in society. Some people earn more, some people earn less, and so there is great inequality in society. And that is the root of all evil in the world. So that's why they forcibly make everyone equal. By the state will assign jobs to every individual. They have to do that job, and their basic necessities will be taken care of by the state. And they are not entitled to any other thing, no luxury, no comfort, no sports of their own choice, no recreation of their own choice. The only thing that they can do is to follow the government. Whatever job they have assigned to you, you have to completely do that job and be happy in the bread and the food and the clothes and the place to live that you have been given by the government. Now, one could think that, okay, in some cases this could be good, or some people this could be good. But this is not so, as we'll get to know later. In this system of government, nobody is the better, because the way they run the government and the society, so many resources are wasted in corruption, in embezzlement, in the transfer of resources, that a lot of people starve to death for just because there is no money, or money is mostly abolished for local produce or local exchange. You are assigned cards by the Communist Party, food card, cloth card, other necessities card. You have to go to the state store for every necessity of yours and show that card, and whatever is your quota, it will be given to you. Even this, and it was, as it sounds, it was horrible. It never functioned properly. And even this could never function properly, because theoretically it cannot function properly. There were so many long queues for just bread, that just for getting bread you had to be in a queue for 8 hours to 10 hours, let alone about a new jacket or a new jeans or an apartment. Very civil things happen. Then there is abolition of private property, so collectivization of also farms, because just by abolition of private property in cities will not be enough. Why? Because farmers will grow their own food. They will be very independent. By growing food, by selling it to the government, they can actually become rich. By becoming rich, they will create inequality in society, and so they cannot be left free. So, like the Annadatas are protesting against this government just for giving bounties to them. They do not know what it is to live under a government, under a communist government, where they are not even allowed to keep their own produce. So there is forced collectivization. What we are not even aware of these words now, because they are so far and distant in memory. But remember that any communist country or any ideology of this variety will ultimately force collectivization of agriculture. They will go to countryside. They will snatch away lands from all the farmers. The state will control those farms. They will assign who will work on these farms. While the farmers will work on these farms, they won't be able to keep the food for themselves. The state will then take away all that food which was grown by the labor of the farmers, and then it will redistribute according to its own whims and fantasies. you can imagine the kind of havoc it can create in society. That all the food, first of all, it is grown forcibly by the government. You have to, even if you want or do not want to, you have to work in fields. You have to work for the government. Once the food is grown, the government takes it away, sometimes not even leaving enough for your own bellies, and then they reassign these resources to the people. So this is the forced collectivization. This is their basic tenets. What do they do when they come to power anywhere in the world? Then destruction of religion. Of course, we have all heard opium of the masses. How Marx said that religion is opium of the masses. They said that religion is a false promise. It is fraud completely. God does not exist. The communists are atheists, first of all. God does not exist. No kind of spirituality, gods and goddesses do exist and can exist. So they have to be destroyed. Churches, mosques, and temples, they have to be destroyed by the state or taken over by the state. Their wealth has to be redistributed. Like we hear once again and again arguments like Hindu temples, the wealth of Hindu temples has to be redistributed in the society. So the same kind of thought communist countries and communist governments implement. Then they control your education, market, academia, arts and sciences, everything, even arts and sciences. So if you, they will run every sort of university and college, of course, because there is no other entity other than the state. But they will also tell you what to do. They will assess you. If they think that you are fit for arts, then you will go to arts. It doesn't matter whether you want to follow arts or not. Whether you want to follow science or not, if they need engineers, you will have to study science. So this is the kind of society that communism wants to create. There is absolutely no personal freedom because this is very fundamental to communism. They always cry about freedom of thought, expression, but that's only because they want to create, destabilize a democratic society. They want to capture power. Once they capture power, there will be absolutely no kind of freedom of thought or expression, because their basic tenet is that if individuals are left free, they will create inequalities between themselves. So a para institution has to take care that every one of them is once again and again forced to become, you can say, equal to each other. And that is how you have to create and bring about equality in society. And that agency is only state. A state means just one party. Party means just one person, which is the supreme leader of that party. So this is how it happens. It is the form of extreme dictatorship, extreme totalitarian state, in which one man rules everyone. His will, like Stalin's will, is the constitution. Anything he says or does becomes the constitution. We do not have luxury to go very deep into these subjects. I'll quote some. Tomorrow, in tomorrow's session, I will quote some things of how brutal communism was, how the expression or the experience of communism was. But this is its basic tenets. Their inspiration is, of course, Marxist, as you can see here. Marx did not invent this entire line of thought. Although he gave it much thought, he created an entire system on it, but he did not invent this thought. This thought was mentioned by Plato, but Plato makes it very clear that it's about a very spiritual, it's a very spiritual idea where everyone is equal. He's very clear about that. It's not about samsara, not about this world. Then Thomas More, a very Christian, fundamentalist Christian in Britain, he created this utopia in which kingdom of heaven is considered to be utopia. Only where Jesus rules completely, which is only can happen only after death. That can be a completely utopian, which means a dream society, a dream equal society. So that was also, Thomas More also believed that this cannot happen. Marx was the first idiot who thought that this could happen, that this could take place in our society. And he tried to create a complete ideology over that. Das Kapital, the Capital is his most important work, is the most famous work. It is not complete. It has 12 volumes. Only one volume is complete. The rest are not complete. He could never complete it because he wanted to give a complete theory. Although he was an atheist, but he copied a various tendencies of Christianity in him. Just like the Bible is considered to be a complete book in which there is every sort of solution, just like the Quran is considered to be a complete book, Das Kapital was also being planned as a complete book. He could never complete it. The second thing in his ideology was that he was an atheist, just like I told you, and he thought that religion is the opium of the masses. It is completely false because his experience was Christian, and experiencing Christianity of late medieval era, you could develop these thoughts. But even to create such a Marxist thought is in itself evil. But yes, his experience of Christianity led him to believe that religion is the opium of the masses. Then he thought that man is basically a financial animal. Just like Freud thought that man is mainly a sexual animal, Marx thought that man is mainly a financial animal. So everything revolves around money, economy. So if you manage the economy, everything else will be managed. And how do you manage the economy? By controlling surplus value, surplus labor, surplus power. And this is why he created the entire system. In his system, there was step-by-step evolution towards a perfect socialist state. But he never thought that, he thought that revolution is necessary. At last stage, revolution will happen, old system will crumble down violently. He believed so under this revolution. But there was one critical difference between Marx and Lenin. Marx never thought that someone has to force fit this revolution. Someone has to forcibly bring out this revolution. He thought that it will be natural. It is a natural course of evolution. First of all, we had feudal societies, then all of these different stages, which we'll discuss later on. And ultimately, it will be a socialist or green socialist society. But it will happen on its own. The revolution will happen on its own. Lenin said that no, this cannot happen on its own, because he realized that it is a stupid idea and it cannot happen on its own. He saw that even those who were very poor or very dispossessed, very marginalized, they were also not inspired enough to wage a communist revolution. He said that a certain faction of professional revolutionaries have to bring about this revolution. Professional revolutionary means those whose very job is to bring about a revolution. So they know no other thing. The only thing that they are experts in is to bring about a social revolution. So that is the entire thought. They divide the society in classes. Class 4, in which there is rich class who controls everything, which is bourgeois, and then there is other class, the masses, which are proletariat. Masses are generally at that time industrial laborers and farmers, but mostly industrial laborers. Communists and socialists have considered farmers always in a very bad light, because they have said that they are riddled with religion. They are very religious in orientation. They are very old-fashioned, traditional. And despite being poor, they are so superstitious that they never agree to the professional revolutionary ideas of these revolutionaries. So Lenin was very clear that this has to start in cities. So we will make the revolution in cities, then we'll go over to the villages and countryside and we'll destroy them, whoever comes in our way, which is practically what he did. Now we'll take a brief look. I think we have taken much time. Communism in Russia. Primitive communism. Now the stages of communism. Primitive communism means tribal communism, in which a few tribes gathered together and took their own decisions. There was no private property. They imagined this stage, although scientists have now proved that there was no such stage in the history of humankind. Then there is feudalism, in which there are feudal lords, जो जमींदार जैसा जो era है, that age. And then there is capitalism, in which currently the entire world is engaged in. Then there is socialism, and at last communism. There is not much difference between communism and socialism. Uh, Communism is just the complete and final form of socialism. That's the only difference. How communism came in Russia. Some things about Russia that you need to know. Uh, Communism came in Russia in 1917. At that time, Russia was a very imbalanced society. There was serfdom. It means there was indentured labor. Bandhua mazdoor jaise hua karte the. Although it was not as cruel as they make it sound now, but there was indentured labor, and the Tsar and various other they were technically the lords of the Tsar, but of various nobles. These serfs worked on communes. Communes were jointly owned farms in which not the state as such, but a noble held a lot of land in which various laborers, various serfs worked for him. Sometimes various farmers joined their lands together and farmed collectively. That was also commune. So they were used to some idea of commune. It was not at all the sort of collectivized agriculture which came on later in Russia, but it was some sort of commune. But there was also high culture. Russian literature is now known as one of the greatest literatures in the history of humankind recently. And it is certainly a mesmerizing sort of literature. After communism, it all just died away, after communism took power. But there was high culture at that time in Russia, and there was a considerable freedom of thought and expression. There is a very easy scale of mapping who is more intolerant. Like in today's India, everyone abuses the state, the government, Hinduism, and at the same time, they also say that they are hegemonic. So if they were that hegemonic, you wouldn't be able to criticize them. So in the times of the Tsar, although there was some persecution, there were some limitations, but everyone could express their views about Tsar like that. They were able to overthrow their government in various stages. And it was very hard to overthrow the communist government, which collapsed on its own, but nobody from the outside could do it. So that shows it. What happened in First World War, I won't go very much into because you all know First World War and it's a very different topic. Russia entered in the First World War on the side of France and England. Uh, it was a very long drawn out war. At first, they all thought that the First World War would end. They did not say it, the First World War, but they thought that the war would end in a few months. It took almost 5 years to end. Millions of Russian soldiers died. Russia was a poor country at that time, and so the strain of economy was too much, and it led to collapse of Russian economy. So there was a hue and cry in Russia that the war has to be ended immediately. But the Tsar could not, after having so many losses, he could not just call his soldiers back from the front. So this created a sort of disenchantment with the government. And a February Revolution happened. Pay attention, this is very important. This revolution in February was not the communist revolution. It was a very democratic revolution in which Tsar stepped down of his own volition when he got pressure from outside, and a provisional government was set up. So a provisional government was set up, which was entrusted with the job of holding elections, ushering in a democratic rule in Russia, in which Tsar would have no or very little role. This Tsar at last realized and did by his own volition, he stepped down himself. And a provisional government was created in the February Revolution, in which it was shown that the citizens of Russia will no longer tolerate a very old style Tsarist government. So this was the real Russian Revolution which happened in February. A provisional government was created under Alexander Kerensky, who was the leader, who is right here at the center. He led a coalition of many parties, and he was entrusted with holding elections in Russia, which he did. So it was February Revolution happened in which communists played no power. Communists of the Bolshevik variety who came to power later on, they played absolutely no role. It was many different parties in the government, and they were democratic in nature. There were many communist parties in sort of different socialist parties in that coalition. like the Socialist Revolutionary Party, the Cadets Constitutional Democratic Party, the Popular Socialists, the Mensheviks, and the Bolsheviks. Now, there was one Socialist Revolutionary Party, and the leftists, the most extreme shade of them became Mensheviks and Bolsheviks. How? What do these words mean? Bolsheviks means the majority, Mensheviks means the minority. It's very simple, and this is how, this is very important. This is how the communists grab language itself, distort language itself. They were in minority. Bolsheviks were always in minority, but they claimed that we are the majority, and they gave themselves the name of majority and started calling the others the minorities. So Mensheviks is minorities, Bolsheviks is majority, but in reality it was the other way around. But they just copyrighted the entire world the majority for themselves. So at least by sound it would always seem that they were in majority. Lenin was the leader of these Bolsheviks, and he gave the idea of professional revolutions. So here you see that there were many different sorts of communist socialist parties, and Lenin was the leader of a very small party. Bolsheviks did not hold more than 5 to 6% of all the communist members of that time, communist parties of that time. They refused to participate in the first provisional government even. They wanted all the power to themselves. Now, who was Lenin? I will not go much into the biography of Lenin, but he was at Germany's payroll. When the Russian Revolution happened, this is very important. When the Russian Revolution happened, Lenin was holidaying, partying in Switzerland, in Zurich. When the revolution happened, Germany wanted a regime change in Russia so that war on its eastern side would end for all. Russia would end the war on Germany's side. Now, Tsar was not doing it. That is why the revolution happened. But the new provisional government which came, it also refused to end war, because for all it too, it was a nationalist matter. So it refused to, once and for all, it refused to stop war at all at once on the eastern front of Germany. So Germany's purpose was not solved. Then it sent Germany on a German train, it sent Vladimir Lenin to Russia between all the war that was taking place. And he was interested. It was not that only Germany incited him to. He always had these ideas of taking power in Russia. But it was on Germany's payroll, on Germany's train, on a German train, that he went to Russia. The deal at that time, various scholars claim, was that Lenin would once and for all end Russia's war on Germany's eastern front. So Germany could focus all of its energies on the western front, on France and England. This is what happened. Lenin went there, the revolution happened, he gained power, and he stopped war immediately like he promised Germany. But a more unfortunate thing happened. Had Germany won, Germany would have shared power with Russia in some sort of way, and Lenin's power would be controlled. But Germany lost. So the stooge of Germany became the supreme leader, who was just to be a stooge of Germany. He became the supreme leader because the master itself died and was defeated in the First World War. This is the course of it. Germany lost, Lenin got Russia all to himself as an accident. Now, how the October coup was happened? Like I told you, the Russian Revolution in February was a real revolution. The October Revolution was not a revolution, it was coup d'etat. What is extremely important, it was a democratic government. Soviet Duma. Duma was the parliament of the provisional government of Russia. It was a democratic government which was thrown over by the communists, by Lenin's party, and not a Tsarist government. A Tsarist government was thrown over by a democratic government, and that democratic government was thrown over by communists in a coup. It was a coup, it was not a revolution, which happened in October. Russian calendar is 12 days old, so it really happened in Germany in our terms, but in those times it was in October. So for them it was in October. So the second Russian Revolution, which is called as the October Revolution, is actually a coup d'etat, and nothing else. After that, after taking power, Lenin started a civil war, And like he promised, he started a war on the peasants because he started from the cities. And how did they start from the cities? They first grabbed the power communication centers, the post offices, and the army. And after that, they went to the villages and started capturing them. Then they started the collectivization of agriculture. Like I told you, the collectivization of agriculture, it actually involves a lot of violence because nobody wants to give his land of his own volition. Anyone who resisted was shot dead right there. Millions died. Then great disaster ensued because by collectivization of agriculture, agriculture itself collapsed. People started starving. Tomorrow I'll discuss in various books how the horrible scenes that happened in Russia in those times and in every other communist country. Then Lenin declared new economic policy, which was called NEP. NEP was nothing but capitalism by the back door, for free market by the back door for a limited period of time. He allowed a small street exchange of foods and goods. So people started growing something, they started selling, and that is how people survived for a few years. But then Lenin died, Stalin came, and then he re-implemented the dream of Lenin. Lenin died in January 1924, just a few years after the revolution happened, coup happened, and Stalin took over. This is the dead body, real dead body of Lenin. They embalmed him. Now, this is the irony. This body is still preserved in Russia and the former Soviet Union. You can still see it. If you go there, you can still see the body of this man. The people who do not believe in afterlife, in any sort of a spiritual life, in any sort of a life other than this body, other than the economic life, they preserve the body of their leader like it is the body of a god. And then they tell everyone else that they do not believe in these things. It is said that Lenin was good, but Stalin was bad. This is not so. Lenin started every other bad policy of Stalin, like collectivization, mass murder, red terror, which was called as the communist terror, was called as red terror. 2 lakh opponents were almost immediately upon Lenin coming to power. Opponents of the Bolshevik party were shot dead by Cheka. Cheka was the secret organization, secret police of Lenin, of the communists. Anyone who opposed the party was declared enemy of the people. And these were the judges, jury, and executioner. There was kangaroo courts held in public. A communist party, 3 members, it was called a troika. Troika means a triad. So 3 members of the Communist Party would come to a village. They would sit down. They will throw fake charges, decide the case right there by revolutionary justice, war communism, and sometimes even execute people right there, kill them right there. This was the kind of courts that Soviet Union and the Communists ran. And they talk about freedom of thought and expression. There were food commissions. People were officially food soldiers who would come with army, with arms to these villages and snatch away the foods and sometimes even seeds from farmers. And Lenin said merciless wars against kulaks. Kulaks is rich farmer, in which every farmer who had something to eat was considered a rich farmer. Death to them. This is his own words. They declared everyone an enemy of the state, like they said that one who wants to keep food for oneself, they said that carried out act of sabotage. That is an act of sabotage. If they criticize the party, then it is spreading anti-Soviet propaganda. If they wanted a holiday, then playing on the religious superstition. If they complained about food shortages, then it was claimed that they were spreading erroneous information about Soviet policies. All other parties were massacred by socialists. How the socialist concentration of power happens, in 4 or 5 slides I will show. First of all other parties, all other opponents were killed, including the Tsar. When he had been imprisoned, he came down, he abandoned power of his own volition. Then his entire family, including his daughters and a 9 years old or 11 years old son, was taken to the Urals and shot dead. They were cut up and then burned and cut up in pieces, and even their bodies could not be found. This is what the communists did to the former rulers. Then, first of all other parties were massacred by socialists. Then all other socialists was massacred by Bolsheviks. All other socialists and communists were massacred by Bolsheviks. Bolsheviks, as I told you, 5% of the communists, of the entire communist power of Russia. They were all eliminated by Bolsheviks. First of all, they came to power, then they eliminated socialist revolutionaries and all other people. Then Bolsheviks were themselves, within their own party, were massacred by the small group of Stalin, which you can see here. And at last, all other Stalin supporters were also massacred by Stalin. And ultimately, no other enemy remained of Stalin. He became the supreme leader, Stalin, who came after Lenin. This is how the revolution became complete in 1938, in which was called the Great Purge. So this is how communists gather power, they concentrate power. They start out from, first of all, crying, there is no freedom of thought or expression, we want freedom of thought or expression. First, they became one player in the democratic setup. Then they started cancelling and destroying other parties. After they come in power, they start destroying those within their party who are not as radical as they are. And at last, everyone else except the supreme leader is destroyed, completely destroyed. This is what happens in a communist state. There is, of course, organized destruction of religions. Churches, millions of churches were destroyed, priests were killed, and their wealth was looted. Collectivization of agriculture. This is a very was a very common scene in Ukraine and many other places in Soviet Union. You can see here people just collapsing, dying on footpaths because there was no food anywhere to be found. There is a book called Execution by Hunger by an Ukrainian called Miron Dolev, and he describes scenes which are so very heartbreaking. Women would stand with their infants near railway lines and will throw these children into the trains so that someone might bring them up because they no longer had any food to feed them. One mother strapped two of her children to her chest and bound her with a rope to a tether so that she and two of her children will die, so at least two other children could live on. But at last, when many of these villages were investigated, every one of them had died. There were ghost towns in Ukraine and many other places in South Russia where you entered these villages and not a single person was alive. People were, and there was nothing to rot because, first of all, they were very cold countries and no flesh was left on their bodies. People would collapse against a flag post, against a wall, just like a Hollywood horror movie, with some people die with their eyes open. This is what happened with the collectivization of agriculture when there was nothing to eat. Then Gulag Archipelago, Stalin created Gulag. Gulag is simply concentration camps. Everyone who was supposed to be an enemy of the Communist Party, they were forcibly put into state-run concentration camps in very cold places. Most of these camps, they force their laborers, their inmates to create something, to contribute themselves to industry. But the living conditions were so horrible. There were constant rapes, constant violence, that generally people did not live past 3 or 4 years. And millions, 2 crore were killed by thrusting them against their own will in these gulags. At one time, 1/10 of the population of Soviet Union was inside these concentration camps. So all of the industrial power of Soviet Union came from here. This is where I will end because we are also running out of time and we don't have the luxury to go into different things. This was the very political side of revolutionary socialism that I told you about. What happens when it is taken to the extreme? There was another branch called evolutionary socialism. Edward Bernstein claimed that you can achieve socialist goals by remaining in a democracy. All the countries in the West now, welfare state, following welfare state, are a result of this kind of socialism, which he called as evolutionary socialism. It has nothing to do with evolution, real evolution itself, but it was called as evolutionary socialism, which we'll discuss tomorrow and also discuss various other, its impact on India and the modern woke liberal ideology.